Right, here we are out in my front yard, the beginnings of a permaculture food forest, where basically it's berry bushes and fruit trees and some herbs.
These are going to get about 15 feet.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't prune them, and why would you? Unless they're blocking the light of, well, it's not a dense bush, so it probably won't. But they'll get that high.
Yeah.
I think the ones in my front yard are about that high now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And they even got cut. You know, they were tall at the tops. Someone had trimmed them.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah. And thick.
I was letting them go.
Yeah, incredibly thick around. So here we're talking about Saskatoon. And you talk about dense. You corrected me earlier. One of our conversations, I described conifers as hardwood, which they are not at all.
Conifers are softwoods, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the thing is, when we use the word hardwood is pretty general because, like poplar, for example, is the softest of the hardwoods.
Right.
So they weren't used much for, like, poplar, if you cut it when it's alive and let it age for about a year before you split it, it's romantic in a Saskatchewan boy's heart that when you have frozen green poplar, when you're splitting it, it sounds like milk bottles breaking.
No, really?
It makes this ping sound that's just so beautiful. But choke cherries and Saskatoons were a big part of our indigenous culture where they needed to make things that would last a while. And choke cherries get thicker and bigger, and they were used for things like the teepee pegs. I have a set of pegs that I think, pegs. I have a set of pegs that were probably in the ground for 30 years and would still be very usable.
Yeah.
Where if you made a set of pegs out of poplar, they'd probably rot out the first summer. So it's the softest of our hardwoods. Choke cherry is really hard, and we've got things like native maples and birches and stuff that are that much harder yet. But we certainly don't have stuff like walnut in Alberta, right?
No.
But part of the reason, and you can see even on this young one, how straight, like some of them are too tiny, but it grows very, very straight. So Saskatoon was popularly used for arrows.
Right.
And again, just a little bigger. There might be, no, everything here is too thin. But they were also commonly used for the lacing pins. When you put a teepee up, you've got the doorway, and you'll have two pins under the door, and then it's kind of like the zipper, where the flaps come around and overlap, and then you weave. A lot of us would take a sharp small knife and cut little designs in the bark even, and they would last for years.
Yeah.
But very, very important part of our food supply, because we have a lot of plants that grow in Western Canada that have, like when we talk about edible wild foods, some of them are edible, but maybe for survival they're not exactly gourmet.
Yeah.
And other things really are gourmet. And so Saskatoons were very favored because they were about the best tasting of all of the wild berries, and into trail mixes and things. Like Terry used to say, that they're like putting some Smarties in your trail mix,
Right.
Just to sweeten things up. So very important to all of the Plains peoples, right across 3 provinces. And the berries is, well, you can't see at this distance, but the flowers here are very plentiful. This little one, this juvenile, is going to have a lot of berries on it.
Yeah, you can see them forming. So
You'll be lucky if you get them before the birds do.
right, we'll see.
I hated that in my front yard. I'd come home one day and say, oh, there's just enough for a pie now. And I'd come home the next morning and see a flock of birds leaving, and it wasn't the neighbor's kids. It was definitely birds that were taking them.
Yeah.
But I prefer the texture. They're a little more solid by far to a blueberry. They have more flavor and texture, so I would give them a whole way up the list food rating.
Yeah.
And
high in pectin too.
Yeah, and just lovely, lovely fruit. But we have, in many different native tongues, there'd be words like Saskawagacha and stuff that when you anglicize them all together, if you put them all in a mixing bowl, that's where the word Saskatoon came from.
Right.
And a lot of tribes that were otherwise even enemies would get together, kind of like Woodstock, in the middle of the plains. They'd all get together for a week of peace, love, and music, and that's where certain ceremonies, like the Sundance, it was a once-a-year thing, I think, for some of the tribes, and they do all sorts of rituals there. There's a place just out of the city of Saskatoon that's kind of, I guess it'd be a provincial park or something now, just on the north end of the city, and running right along the Saskatchewan River there, where it's open for, like, writing on stone is here. You can go in and tour and that sort of thing. They probably have teepees up, and you can go in and visit what we refer to as lodges, and that's why lodgepole pine got its name, because that tree doesn't grow any further eastward than about where we're sitting.
Right.
And they were the best ones to put teepees up with, because they grow real tall and straight, but are very skinny at the bottom, where a spruce tree that size would be about 10 inches at the bottom and just too heavy to work with.
Right.
And when it was time to move, and of course the Cree people in particular were always on the move, following the buffalo herds and whatnot, and the poles would be either just dragged singly, or if you had a horse or two, you'd bundle some of the poles together and have one on each side, and those were like their trailers.
Right.
They'd put crossbars and have all their, like the teepee cover itself and all of their clothing and whatnot. But yeah, Saskatoons got mixed in with just about everything else for the pemmicans and things like that.
Yeah.
Because they tasted better. So just a very important food source. And
I heard the origin of Bow River, my understanding, comes from the Saskatoon. That the river where the wood is used to make bows. So you mentioned arrows. Did they also make bows out of Saskatoon?
I didn't know that.
No? Okay.
I thought the bow,
What would the bow be made out of?
if you went up high in a helicopter, or in a drone, when you look down on, I know Terry had some stories about that, the way the rivers come together, where the elbow comes to join the bow and that sort of thing.
Right.
That the bow had a shape to it like a bow, and the elbow looked like somebody holding the bow back.
Oh,
just the way the
okay.
rivers curved, so the elbow was there, and
Right.
that ties in with not far from us here, Nose Hill Park, and I don't know, again, you got to be real high to see these things,
Right.
or maybe high on mushrooms to see these things, I don't know, but high on something.
And your flying ointment.
But yeah, but they were always around any of the woods where I grew up as a child, and nothing in my mind is better than a Saskatoon Berry Pie.
Yeah, for sure.
And we were talking earlier about my first trip off this island, Turtle Island, was to France in the Provence area, and we were staying at what they call a gîte there, what here we call a hostel. And the road from the main road, the branches full of berries were so, like this thing's going to be, they were so heavy with berries, they were hanging over the road and would almost get caught in roof racks and things. And when I asked the owners why they hadn't picked the berries yet, they looked at me funny and what berries? And I said, well, the ones that you under on the road. And they don't know Saskatoons. That's a Western Canadian thing.
Yeah.
But I was delighted that they only call them by their Latin name, which is Amelanchier. And she went, oh, the Amelanchier? I said, yes, you don't eat those? Oh, no, you couldn't eat those, you know.
Wow.
And
It's so surprising because they're so, like, alluring, right?
yeah,
Like,
they
just
did,
appealing,
and
like-
they did, you try one, and they didn't. There was some years ago, I did a couple of, what were they, 10-day stays, I think, at a summer camp. Is it Pine Lake? I don't know. It's a summer camp that was set up by the Jewish community years ago, and just for their own people. And children would come from other cities to go to this summer camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the first people. A friend of mine who was Jewish expressed to the board that made such decisions that I was just open-minded enough that I'm different than most other people. And so he got me the job there. And the young children, say 8-year-olds, didn't get a chance to leave camp for liability reasons, probably. But the older kids got to do a run down the Red Deer River.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had my own canoe with me, and somebody might drop me on the river at a certain bridge, and I might camp with the kids for the night and then take them for a herb walk in the morning, and then somebody would pick me up at the next bridge, kind of thing. And they kept me busy. They were moving me around all the time. But one day we were coming down the Red Deer River, and the tripper, they called him, this probably 20-year-old young man who was responsible for doing the whole thing. He kind of pulled over to me on the river. We're in our canoes going downstream. And he said, "Hey, Herb guy, how good are you?" And I said, "Well, what do you need? What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I screwed up on the meal planning. And the bus isn't coming till 4 o'clock today. We have no lunch or anything." And I said, "Oh, okay." Well, I said, "I'll give you a whistle and a sign when it's time," because the canoes were quite far apart on the river. Mm-hmm. And I saw coming up an aspen grove, and lots of greenery and moss and such. And I blew the whistle, and he saw me, and I gave the get off the river sign, and we pulled in. So we had, it was interesting that they had a few loaves of bread which were totally soggy. The children had too much fun doing water fights all the time. So some of the kids were laying all this wet bread out on big rocks to dry in the sun.
Yeah.
And all they had was a couple chunks of cheese about this big, so the boys were kind of whittling it, mm-hmm. so they could kind of make wraps with the cheese. So the kids came with me on a little herb walk, and we found a bunch of plantain leaves and other things. We make a big salad.
Yeah.
And so after the meal, I said, "Okay, we got enough time to do another herb walk here if any of you want to come with me." And a lot of the kids didn't. They were lazy and just wanted to suntan. So a group of these kids came with me, and we went over this little hill the other direction, and they were the biggest, fattest, thickest Saskatoons I'd ever seen, right?
Yeah.
And so the kids, "Are you sure we can eat these?" "Oh, yes. These are the best berries in around, you know." And they started picking them, and I said, No, everybody, pretend you're a bear."
Right.
And they looked at me and said, "No hands." Oh, so they were all leaning in and just eating the berries with their faces, you know.
Stripping them off.
So when we came back over the hill, these kids had the biggest smiles I've ever seen on children, and their shirts were just covered with berry juice. You know, they just had the purple juice all over their faces and T-shirts. And looking at all these other sobs that didn't want to come and telling them what losers they were for not coming along. But that was the biggest feast I've ever had, and shared with another group of people. Hey, but
I'm sure that would have stuck with them the rest of their lives.
Some of the places around town that, like, it likes to be not in water but in sight of water.
Right.
So all of our river valleys typically have Saskatoons, and I used to go pick them along the reservoir.
Oh yeah.
What park is on the north side of the reservoir? Where
North Glenmore Park.
I guess
Weasel Head is kind of west.
Well, yeah, that area.
Yeah.
And you can just go in any of that area along there's the big hillsides there, the cliffs.
Yeah.
Well, not cliffs, but hillsides. And that's where I used to go when I lived in Killarney for a few years, and I would go there. It's a short drive.
Yeah.
And pick enough to make a few pies.
Yeah.
But definitely one of our most flavorful. It's the gem of our our wildlands.
Totally, and it's kind of a bit of a gateway wild food in that sense. You know, whenever I take people out, we always ask, like, do you have any experience picking, or do you have any kind of early memories? And it's always berries, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, when you share that story about the kids, I'm sure that'll stick with them the rest of their life, and hopefully, you know, a seed metaphorically is planted that there's an abundance on the landscape.
When I was hired for that job, I wasn't sure it was going to work.
Right.
Because I hadn't worked with children before, and I'm not a parent.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't too certain going in. I thought, well, I'm used to adults coming in intentionally and spending hard-earned money to hear my stories and whatnot. But this is a group of children. Can I relate to them or not? Mm-hmm. And it was huge. It went over so huge with the kids. And I ran into one of the board members on the street that fall. And he said, Blaine, we've been getting letters and faxes from all over Canada about your stay at our camp, and we've never had none of the faith person before. You're the first one. And we've had all this mail, and it's 100% positive, like you were a real hit with our children.
Wow, awesome.
And so that felt good.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and I learned from them, it was interesting that the whole time I was there, I didn't see a fight. And later, one of their parents, or somebody's parent, said, it's very simple, Blaine, there was no adults there other than you.
Right.
You know, little boys have to show off to their dads or whatever. There was just nothing negative going on. Yeah. And so the children that didn't get to go on the river, their biggest thing to do was they got to go spend a night out in the raging forests with Blaine the barefoot herb walker man.
Yeah.
And they had to wrap up their own bedrolls and everything. And I learned from these young girls, not that I didn't have respect for women, but a greater respect for the females of our society, because when something goes wrong, little boys are embarrassing. Like I was embarrassed to be a male. Like when something goes wrong, somebody's injured or their gear breaks down or something, little girls band together, round up in a circle, solve the problem. Yeah. Like they're teamsters,
right?
You know, and so in this day and age now, when we've got women soldiers, and you know, I've got some beautiful wrought iron welding women welders and stuff like that, and you know, soldiers in every occupation, I'm just all for it. Like they're more organized. They can certainly be more planning and conniving if they have to be. And so anyway, on one of the occasions where the weather looked a little dicey, after supper, one of the boys ran up to me and said, Blaine, is the group going to go out tonight? And I said, well, the weather's looking a little dicey. We're probably not going to go. And if we go at all, I'm going to take a group of the girls. And he was like, how come, Blaine? How come the girls can go? We can't go. What I wanted to say, because you're a bunch of freaking wimps. You know? But it was the truth.
Right.
And again, we were, same on one of those trips, we got to the place where the bus was going to be coming. And we were kind of on the wrong side of the river, and got swept downstream a ways from where the bus was going to be way up here. And I said, oh, that's okay, we can upstream ferry. And the instructor, I was crushed that the instructor didn't know what an upstream ferry was. And I got in my canoe by myself and showed them what you got to kind of lean into it a certain way, and you keep your bow tilted to the direction you're going, and you paddle a little harder than you usually would, and then you just go perfectly parallel across, and then you're on the other side.
Right.
And they were, oh, well, you're in your fancy canoe and you're big and strong, we're just kids. So I picked the smallest girl I could see on the beach, and I said, okay, Susie, you come and be my bowspperson, and I did it with the smallest girl there.
Right.
And when they saw that we did that, then they all got involved, and the what did I say they called him, the tripper, finally caught on, and all the kids got across the river okay, and then partied for a while until the bus came on the other side of the river. But yeah, like I always say, every time I do a group, no matter what the age is, I always learn from them,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
We had a group for Elder Hostel. They have a magazine, I guess, that goes around to all of the old folks' homes or whatever, all over North America. And somebody from Elder Hostel had booked me for a trip out at Ribbon Creek. So they were going to bring, they had a couple of chefs there that were going to do all the cooking. And the chefs were open-minded enough that if we brought some wild plants, they'd work it into the menu,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And we did a few times. And I was just amazed with how active these elders were. And one of them was, he was a detective, retired detective from Miami, I think it was. And he was the scoutmaster for the whole state. And I thought, okay, this is perfect because a lot of my stories are going to get retold to a whole bunch of children. That, you know, I just knew that I was going to have this,
Right. Yeah.
you know, huge influence on a whole lot of people just having that scoutmaster there. And I was very surprised that, I mean, a lot of times we have things booked here, and you're aware of this now with all the classes you do, that sometimes it's a week away and you're wondering if it's going to happen or not.
Right.
And these guys had officially, I got a written letter that the outing, it was a week-long outing, and it was booked, it was fully booked 8 months before the trip.
Wow.
And there were people there from as far away, like as I said, of Florida.
Yeah.
And I thought these people would have been coming because maybe they had a married daughter who lived in Calgary or something like that. They're coming to visit, and we may as well do this herb walk thing.
Yeah.
But several of them said, no, we came just for you.
Oh, amazing.
And they were all very pleased with how the week went.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's things like Western Canada violet, you probably know.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it's the big tall one. They get about this tall, and they love shady hillsides.
Yeah.
And where you find it growing, typically, it'll just own a
Right.
hillside. So going in and, you know, picking a bunch of that doesn't matter to anybody.
Yeah.
And meadow rue is one that I like. It tastes a bit like snow peas.
That's right.
So we picked a bunch of that stuff to go in. The chefs just made a rice thing, and we had the steamed greens with it, you know. And it's just been really lovely over the years being able to work with every age.
Yeah.
And like I said, every time I'm doing something, even this morning, I've learned a few things from you. Like, once again, you know, the more we share these stories, there's always, nobody knows it all. And as I've looked at the couple of sessions we've already done, I kept remembering other things I forgot to throw in.
Right.
You know, with the different
Oh,
stories.
That
you know.
always happens. That
Yeah.
always happens. Yeah.
But
Well, that's why we keep doing, you know, these conversations to kind of, yeah. dig
so
a
we
little
can
deeper
say,
and
y'all
share some more.
come back now, because we might have completely different stories next week.
That's right. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for watching this one, everybody.
Once again.